Welcome to the Shaping Portsmouth podcast. Shaping Portsmouth is a collaboration of key Portsmouth businesses, transforming Portsmouth together. Hello and welcome to another Shaping Portsmouth podcast with me, CEO Dave Humphries, and today I'm joined by Keith Herbert from Southern Water. Welcome, Keith.
Hello, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming. Now, I won't beat around the bush. Clearly, talking to somebody from Southern Water, I think the thing that most people will want to hear about is what we might term as the sewage scandal and what's going on there. But before we get onto that, let's kind of just set the scene with who you are and what your role is. So what is your role at Southern Water?
So I'm the engineering lead, and at risk of sounding too tawdry, my job is to stop sewage getting out into the rivers and seas of the south.
Yeah, cool. Quite an important thing to be doing. And what's your background?
I'm a geologist, but I've worked in the water industry for over 15 years in a variety of roles.
Right. So how do you go from kind of geology to water?
I wanted a career where I could make environmental improvements, but also that was quite resilient. I have a young family and I didn't ever want to be at risk of redundancy, so I chose something that is interesting but also has a lot of stability because people are always going to need water and sanitation. So that was my thinking when I got into it, and I found it bewitching and really, really interesting, and has all aspects of a good career. It's got engineering, it's got finance, it's got environmental, it's got people leading. It's just a fantastic thing. And any listeners who were interested in a career, I'd maybe not listen to some of the headlines, and I'd research what you can actually do in a water company. It's so varied.
And did you do a degree in geology?
I did do a degree in geology, and I use aspects of it, but I wasn't the most attentive student.
Right. But I'm guessing there's an obvious connection between geology and water anyway, just in terms of where our water comes from.
That's right, where our water comes from, where it goes, and the environmental impact of water management as well, which is our most precious resource.
Yeah, definitely. So are you local? Are you from Portsmouth?
I live on the Isle of Wight, but I spend most of my time in Portsmouth now because we're spending £170 million on stopping storm overflows into Portsmouth Harbour. So pretty much all my work is now in and around Fareham, Gosport and Portsmouth.
Okay, but from Portsmouth originally?
No, from the Midlands.
So how did you end up in Portsmouth?
I married into my connection with Portsmouth. My wife lived in Waterlooville, and her father is in the Navy, so that's the connection. So I married into my affiliation.
Excellent. So moved down here from the Midlands and working for a local business.
Yeah, never look back.
Yeah, cool. So right. Sewage scandal. So, right at the heart of this, if we mention Southern Water, people will think about the reports of sewage being pumped into the sea. They'll think about chief execs getting massive bonuses, so money from their water bills going as dividends and profits to people, and nothing being done to stop stuff being pumped into the sea and dealt with properly, perhaps. But is that really what's happening?
Like all things you read about in the press, that's only part of the story. And while some of the stuff that you see quite rightly does elicit a huge amount of anger, there is some truth to it, but there's more to it. So the sewage scandal, really, I guess the way I would explain it is, if you imagined Portsmouth before it was inhabited, the rain would fall on grassland or deciduous woodland and it would get soaked up. Over time, human beings have come along and they've paved over more or less everything. So when you look around Portsmouth, you see concrete, you see driveways, roads, roofs, car parks, conservatories. There's very little green area. And because Portsmouth is a fairly old city, it has what's called a combined system. So when it rains, the water runs off all those surfaces into one pipe and overwhelms it, to the extent it's not uncommon to get 10 times the normal flow in our sewers. And fundamentally, it can't cope. The systems were never designed to treat that much stormwater, and the biggest cost that water companies have is power, just pumping that rainwater around in circles. It doesn't need treating. So the point I would really like to land for all the listeners is, if water companies only had to treat sewage, there wouldn't be storm overflows. We have storm overflows because of all of that rainwater that gets in there. So our principal strategy to stop that is to take that rainwater out. So, but there's so many things connected to that, and we have an app called Rivers and Seas Watch, and you can log into that any time, night or day, and find out how regularly or more or less real time whether your local storm overflow is operating. And quite rightly, people are horrified with what they see, and they want change, and so do we. So that kind of gives you a brief overview of the sewage scandal in inverted commas. So hopefully within a few minutes of talking, I've explained a very complex subject.
Yeah. So a couple of things in there just to kind of clarify then. So I think in terms of roles, we've got two water companies, haven't we? We've got Portsmouth Water and we've got Southern Water, both operating in the city. What's the difference between you?
So our friends at Portsmouth Water do the potable water supply. So they do the supply and distribution. So when you turn on your tap, that's Portsmouth Water. In this area, we do the wastewater. So we take away the sewage and the stormwater from people's houses, treat it, and return it to the environment. So that's the division of labour in this part of the world.
And so you also mentioned combined pipes. So what? Just for people that might not understand why combined pipes could be a problem, what is a combined pipe, and what is the alternative for places that don't have combined pipes?
If you were going to build a new estate or a new town, you would have one pipe that takes the wastewater from toilets, sinks and dishwashers that go off to be treated. And you would have another pipe that would take away the stormwater, which doesn't need treated. However, when the Victorians built most of the big cities in the UK, and in fact most of the world's cities, they have combined systems. This one pipe takes everything. So as I said before, when it rains, that one pipe gets completely overwhelmed, and that's why storm overflows happen. So one of the kind of misconceptions that you hear is that it's a conscious choice by water companies to release sewage when they want. That's not the case. The only way that we stop people flooding is to make those releases. So it's fundamentally what we have to do, because somewhere like Portsmouth is very low lying, very close to sea level. If storm overflows didn't exist, there would be so many people, probably thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people, that would flood on such a regular basis. Their homes would be uninhabitable. So that is why storm overflows are there. They're a relic. It sounds like I'm advocating for them. I'm not. I fundamentally find that the whole thing completely repulsive. However, they are there to serve a purpose, and we need to stop the stormwater getting in, so we reduce our reliance on these releases.
Okay, so back to that point around if you didn't have the storm overflows. So we turn the tap off, we close those storm overflows, we have lots of heavy rain. That would cause flooding, or is that just drainage in the street wouldn't work, so water in the street would build up, or would that have an impact in people's houses? Would that cause stuff to backflow out of drains and toilets? What actually happens?
All of the above.
Right.
The consequences would be so undesirable. People wouldn't be allowed to, they wouldn't be able to.
Way of putting it.
Yeah. Sewage would come out through people's toilets. It would come out in the road. People's houses would flood. People's living rooms would flood. It would be horrible. So storm overflows are there for a reason. We cannot just block them up. We need to invest in our infrastructure, and we need to invest in urban spaces to stop that rainwater getting into the system. And that's the crux of it.
Right. So coming in and replacing all of the combined pipes seems quite problematic, as that's all in place under quite a substantial built-up urban area. So I'm guessing that's not an option.
It can be. An accusation that gets levelled at me quite often is it's an infrastructure problem. You're not investing in your infrastructure. It's my job to look at different ways of fixing storm overflows, and in some ways, building bigger, building better is an option. But in most cases, we simply couldn't build tanks big enough. We couldn't build sewers big enough. We need to look at our urban areas and how we build better. So these areas that I said in Portsmouth, the car parks, the roads, the roofs, all these big impermeable areas, we need to revisualize our cities and think about sponge cities, about how the rainwater can be returned to ground close to where it fell. And in a lot of cases, some of the things that we would be building in conjunction with the local authority, like rain gardens, swales, tree planting, etc., will not only stop the rainwater overwhelming our system, but it will also lead to more attractive areas, help with pollination, help with urban cooling. And fundamentally, people want to spend more time in areas that are greener. So, for instance, when I'm in a city with my family, we spend a bit of time shopping or sightseeing, but inevitably we gravitate towards the green areas, the parks, of which there's not a huge amount in Portsmouth. So one of the key strategies to reducing storm overflows and better urban drainage is to regreen areas and introduce these drainage features that are long gone because we've tarmacked over everything.
Yeah. Okay. So, lots of different issues there, and fundamentally, when you get to the crux of it, you're now talking about spaces that are not under your control.
That's right. And as things stand, water companies have no power to work on apparatus that is not theirs. It's always been seen as an end of pipe problem. We'll just keep on building a bigger tank. We're building a bigger works. But if you look at what's going on in the UK at the moment with the housing targets and planning reform, the government's got to build very, very ambitious housing targets to cope with the surplus. That sits very uncomfortably alongside our targets to reduce storm overflows. So it's key that we engage with local authorities, local planning offices, to make sure that the new builds that are built are the most water efficient and sustainably draining. And together we deal with the existing housing stock going forward. So there's two things that would really help from government. The first of all is make water companies statutory consultees in the planning process, because at the moment we're not statutory consultees. And also there is an automatic right to connect. So developers can come in and build what they want and connect in. We don't really have powers to stop that. But the second one is working with owners of large impermeable areas like car parks, big industrial units, local authorities with roads, and give us the power to install more sympathetic drainage rather than just throwing water down the sewer that doesn't need treating.
So, okay. So going back to the planning side of it. So I want to build a house on a piece of land. There's nothing at the moment that stops me connecting my guttering, if you like, into the sewage system.
No, we have no powers to stop that. So if your listeners are bored one night and need some stuff that's going to send them to sleep, Google Welsh Water versus Barratt Developments. And there's the landmark case where Barratt Developments wanted to build quite a significant housing development. Welsh Water said, no, absolutely not. You'll cause flooding and pollution. It went to court and it ruled in Barratt favour. So that's the kind of landmark case that we look at. In reality, we work a lot closer with developers and local authorities, and we've got really good relationships to stop that happening. However, it's always in the back of our head that we can never say no. So which is why it's important that we establish partnerships and engage with people.
Because I know where I live, all of the water that comes off my roof into the guttering goes into soakaways pipes, not into the sewer.
That makes me very happy indeed.
Good. It makes my garden quite happy, I think, because it's probably helping my grass grow. But that's obviously something that's then been planned in voluntarily, not through any sort of building regs or planning law.
That's right. And, you know, as well as kind of the fix, part of my job is influencing and trying to get the right decisions through local authorities and developers and government to try and encourage these changes. Because we can take out loads of stormwater by regreening Portsmouth, but if a developer's going to come along and connect it all back in afterwards, it's quite heartbreaking.
Yeah. So the second bit you mentioned there is kind of car parks and sympathetic drainage. What's sympathetic drainage then?
Well, I think everyone can do a little bit more to attenuate or slow down the water from their property. So you can install a water butt to capture the flow. So when it rains, it doesn't just rush into our sewer and overwhelm it, it fills up a water butt. Do you really need that driveway to park your car on? There's other ways to do it where the water can soak in. Those are the kind of conversations we're having with customers. For kind of larger landowners, could we disconnect their roof drainage? Could we put it onto planters? These very attractive planters that you can have, and you can have a little project planting it with really nice stuff. But when we get into the really big stuff, we need to work with large landowners like local authorities to almost redesign cityscapes and streetscapes. So we could have a swale by the side of the road, because you drive around a lot and you see it's quite common to see grass either side of the road. That grass could just be lowered a little bit for the water to drain into a little ditch, which can be planted up quite nicely. That's what I would call sympathetic drainage. Yeah. It's not particularly sympathetic for it to race into a sewer, be pumped all the way across Portsmouth to Eastleigh, be pumped to Bud's Farm and then treated at Bud's Farm. That rainwater does not need treating.
So when you talk about a swale, you're essentially talking about sort of grass-lined low ditches.
Yeah, just a little ditch by the side of the road. Simple. And again, there's other sources of pollution other than water companies, and highway runoff is a real problem. So highway runoff has microplastics, it has tyre particles, it has brake discs, it has hydrocarbons from the fuel and the lubricants. It's not nice stuff. And if you introduce that stuff to a bioswale or a ditch, nature's pretty good at treating it. So I'm not saying that road runoff should go into watercourses, but there are other ways to treat water that at the moment we just dispose of in the foul sewer.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got this kind of sympathetic drainage plan. You work with local authorities to try and redesign those sort of urban cityscapes to introduce sort of better practices and regreening, etc. But what about beyond the local authorities? What does that look like in terms of businesses, perhaps, or homeowners? What can be done there?
So if you're looking at your property, like you say, the water from your roof doesn't necessarily have to go into the foul sewer. You can capture it with water butts. You can put it on planters. You can even downturn your downpipe onto a flower bed. So when it rains, rather than rush into our sewer, it goes onto a flower bed. And there's incentives for doing that. We have a different tariff for people who we don't accept their stormwater through. So you can offset the bill increases by disconnecting the stormwater from your system. So there's incentives to do that. So, and then for larger customers, for kind of non-household customers, like the large warehouses and so on, there's really cool stuff that you can do with your rainwater. You can disconnect it. You can go to a watercourse. Again, some of the larger companies that we're working with, we're appealing to their kind of environmental social governance, because I like to think that most people would be horrified if they thought they were contributing towards flooding and pollution. And it's just an education piece, really, because no one gives a second thought about where their stormwater goes. And we've spoke exclusively about pollution, but there's flooding as well. So a number of years ago, I think it was 2021, there was some horrible flooding in Cosham and Drayton around there. And there's an example of where you've got really large impermeable area all rushing down the hill. Now, just applying that logic, what I just spoke about, the people at the top of the hill with the driveways, conservatories, I'd like to think they were horrified if they thought they were contributing towards the flooding of people moving out their houses because their flooding was so bad. That's kind of what we're talking about here, just on a much, much, much larger scale.
Right. Yeah, you probably would like to think that. I wonder if they were probably just more relieved it wasn't them. But yeah, clearly a problem. So, I've heard talk of 170 million being invested into, preventing that storm overflow into the harbour. And that is a locally specific project. So why is it happening here?
It's happening here because of the protection that Portsmouth Harbour and parts of the Solent have in terms of its environmental designation. It's a site of special scientific interest. It's a shellfish bed. It's a special conservation area. So our environmental regulators have targeted us towards this, which is great news for me because it's it's an iconic water body and it's a part of the world I absolutely love. And being part of the improvements that it's going to see fills me with a great deal of joy and optimism.
So We've landed this £170 million project. Where's the money coming from?
It's coming from mostly funded by customers' bills. So
Right.
you would have seen in the press that the bills are going up. I appreciate that that's not what people want to hear. People who are struggling with their bill, I would encourage to get in touch with us. We have a series of different tariffs and support for people who are financially vulnerable or need specific additional needs for their water bill. So that's the first point.
Yep.
The second point is that my team and I are going to make sure that every penny of that money is going to go towards environmental improvements like that. So the bill rises will go to fund projects like this, which will have a direct benefit for economies that are so reliant on tourism, because it's not acceptable to me where people are coming on holiday and the storm overflows are stopping them wanting to go into the sea.
Yeah.
Or if you run a business, say, for instance, you hire out paddle boards and you have a quiet day because there's been a storm overflow, that's just not where we need to be.
No.
It's so important that we get this funding to help communities like that, because the spotlight is on us and it's on the area, and we need to do everything we can to stop this happening.
Yeah. And I'm guessing there will be people that read kind of the media reports, about the sewage scandal, about the bonuses and the dividend payments, and we'll just say, yeah, bill increases, that just equals more money for executives. But this money is actually going into making improvements.
It's ring fenced and it's going into making improvements, but we do need to pay regard to that subject. And our investment model attracts investors, and those investors directly invest. So the people who currently own Southern Water Macquarie have come along and put in about $1.5 billion of their own money to kickstart projects like this. If we were nationalised, we would be in competition with schools, healthcare, and everything else, and I think water would be the poor relation to that.
Yeah.
And I guess for the first 3/4 of my career, water has always been like the silent service that hasn't really got any exposure. My goodness, how that has changed over the past couple of years. And part of me does welcome it, because people see a lot of value in that. But going back to the money, a lot of the money isn't actually going to go on water company infrastructure. It's going to go on other people's infrastructure to make that drain better. And in a lot of cases, it's going to leave it in a much nicer state and have much greener cities that are going to be more attractive. So you can't just think about water and think about water companies. You need to think about the whole cycle, about where it comes from, where it lands, and where it goes to. And we're investing in all of it with that money.
So what does the plan look like for that 170 million quid then?
Well, there are 37 combined sewer overflows that discharge into Portsmouth Harbour, and we've got a plan and a funding for every single one of them to stop it activating as much as they do. So yeah, I could talk all day. You'll need a longer podcast for that if you want me to go through all of them. But Pier Road Southsea, for instance, the Environment Agency classifies that as a poor bathing water. And it's not just water companies. There are other things like highway drainage, private outfalls, private drainage systems, and agriculture. However, that does not sit well with me, and we need to just throw everything out sorting that out.
And so how do you start doing that with a location like that, with all of those different contributing problems?
Oh man, we're going to get into some real technical stuff, so I apologise. Your viewership's going to go through the floor if you really get me going. But we need to understand what causes it to spill. So, sometimes the tidal water gets in, sometimes it's just rainfall responsive, sometimes there's infiltration. There's so many different things that we need to look at, and that's what my team and I spend all of our lives doing, is obsessing over trends, over models, and then trying to fix it. So, in the instance of Pier Road Southsea, there's just so much impermeable area, car parks, roads, roofs upstream of that we're going to have to manage and we're going to have to put right.
So for somewhere like that, you would be looking at where you can make changes to that as a cause of the problem.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, you can do a very simple equation. So, if you've got 100 meters squared and it rains for 5 millimeters, you can figure out what volume ends up in our system. If you extrapolate that out and look at the whole of Portsea Island or the drainage catchment of Southsea, that's huge, absolutely huge. And, going into the numbers, it ultimately ends up at Bud's farm, which can have 10 times the flow when it rains. Thousands of litres a second coming in, several tons a second. It just can't cope.
Okay.
There's a strategy for every single one, which we've been building, and then we're good to go for the next 2 years. It's going to be a very big project.
Yeah. And so I'm guessing because the cause of the problem will vary in different locations, therefore so will the solution.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah.
So it makes it quite interesting to do from your perspective, I suppose.
Yeah, it's my life's work. Fundamentally, I think about very little else. So whereas you go into Fareham and Gosport, they do have separate systems. So there's a separate sewer for the stormwater and the foul. So we'll largely be disconnecting people in that part of the world. Yeah. But as you go over the water to Portsmouth, which is older, has a combined system, we're going to have to manage it in situ. Yeah. So we have regular meetings with Portsmouth City Council and really ambitious ideas about what we can do to our urban areas to intercept and slow down that water. Yeah. So watch this space.
Okay. And so obviously we've been talking about water and the problems linked to stuff in the water in various different guises. But you earlier on you mentioned pumping. And so there's a secondary issue here in terms of, I suppose, should we call it the carbon footprint of water? Which I suppose would be easy to think, well, it's water, it doesn't have a carbon footprint, that's power. But there's a lot of pumping involved, isn't there?
Yeah, like I said before, Portsmouth is a very low place. I'm sure there's some people who live more or less below sea level. So all the sewage and rainwater on Portsmouth is pumped to some extent, and a cubic metre of water weighs a tonne. So all the sewage needs pumping, and when it rains, all of the rainwater also needs pumping. So the biggest operational cost for water companies isn't people or chemicals, it's power. We spend huge amounts on power, and that has a huge carbon footprint. So you almost get into a philosophical debate about environmental harm. So obviously releasing untreated sewage causes environmental harm. But if that's 1 part sewage to 10 part rainwater, the sooner or later you get to a point where the environmental harm of pumping it is worse than the environmental harm of releasing it.
Yep.
Now, that's not my decision to make, and that's a philosophical debate, which I suggest we don't go into. However, we can't just keep on building bigger, pumping more, what is almost exclusively rainwater, because it has a huge environmental footprint. So water companies use about 5% of the national grid, which is absurd. And most of that is just pumping.
Yeah.
So again, if you take it out, if you build nice green spongy cities, you won't need to pump it.
Yeah.
So it has so many knock-on benefits to do that. So the cumulative impact of everyone having driveways, conservatories, etc., that's what we need to go after. So yeah.
Okay, not an easy one. So obviously you've got the ring fence budget. You've obviously got plans. You sort of looking at data and trying to develop solutions. What do timelines look like for this?
Well, it is an easy one because our timelines have been set by the regulator.
Right.
All of those 37 CSOs that discharge into Portsmouth Harbour need to be fixed by 2027.
Okay, that's not very long.
No. So that's very ambitious timelines. So our investment structure and our approach will be equally aggressive.
Okay. What happens if you don't?
We will get fines. Deadlines. We will get prosecutions. So again, another misconception of water companies is that we don't get that. We do. Our regulators are very forthright. It's just because you don't often see it. It's not as reported. But water companies step out of line. They get fines. They get prosecuted. So that's what will happen if we miss that target.
So you get fined an enormous amount for failing to meet that target. Doesn't that just get offset against bills and cost customers even more?
No, it comes from a different source.
Does it?
It does.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, that's another misconception. So all of that is kind of built into what our economic regulator Ofwat determines every 5 years, and we've just gone through one of these cycles. And if you are really suffering from insomnia, you can start to read some of these documents and how that works. So basically, every time that we get fined, prosecuted, etc., it eats into the amount of money that the water companies get to make and the profit and so on. So and it's very, very aggressive. It's very, very aggressive. It encourages water companies to do the right thing.
So, how confident are you that you'll achieve the 2027 targets?
I'm very confident.
Are you?
Yeah.
That's good.
With a caveat,
Okay.
which is combined sewer overflows are effectively very elaborate rain gauges.
Yeah.
So my performance, my targets, is predicated on how much it rains,
Yeah.
which I've had a very successful 2 months
Yeah.
in March and April
Yeah.
because it's been very, very dry. However, if it rains lots, the combined sewer overflows. So we're designing to 20, 30 millimeter rainfall events, which is significant. So that's kind of the design standard of what we're trying to do. We're trying to stop storm overflows for 20, 30 millimeter events.
Yeah.
To put that in context, you get maybe about 3 or 4 of those a year in Portsmouth.
Yeah.
It's not acceptable to have storm overflows after 5 millimeters of rainfall, which in some cases is what's happening.
Yeah. Okay. And why is it happening at that level?
Because we haven't had a chance to go around and manage all the car parks, roads, and roofs yet.
So it is solely down to that problem. Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, if water companies only had to treat sewage, we wouldn't have storm overflows.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got the Great British Summer coming, so I suspect your rain levels are going to go downhill a bit. But no, it's I suppose it's interesting when the kind of the concept of performance being based on all things being equal. The weather is a big determinant factor on how successful or not you can be. But I suppose it's making sure the right solutions are in place so that the weather doesn't have a bearing on it.
Yeah, and there's more to it, obviously, and part of that is helping people, water users, surfers, swimmers, sailors, make informed decisions about how they go in. Now, water companies, Southern Water will never say it's either safe or not safe to go in because there's more sources of pollution other than sewage. Like I said, there's agriculture, there's road runoff, there's private drainage systems, there's boats, there's dogs on the beach, there's seagulls, etc.
Yep.
All we can do is say there's been a storm overflow, we think it's impacted or not. We need to fund more research and understand more about water quality because at the moment the Environment Agency take regular samples.
Yep.
Those samples take 48 hours grown in a petri dish overnight to get the results. That's not good enough to people if they've got their bucket and spade and they want to go in and they're ready to go. So we're looking at other ways to measure water quality through proxies so we can give bacteriological results more or less real time. Because is it safe to go in or not is very, very difficult to answer. The natural environment is not sterile. E. coli, enterococci, all these things, all these bugs, they form naturally in there. It isn't just sewage that does it. That just creates a really muddled picture, and part of that is educating people and informing them to make better decisions. Now, I find it really hard when people say, "Oh, there's a storm overflow over there. I'm not going in. It's ruined my holiday, or it's ruining a sailing regatta." It gives me a knot in my stomach. However, I can understand why people do that, and it's all about education and encouraging people and giving them the best possible information.
Yeah, definitely. So, obviously, at Shaping Portsmouth, we are big champions of the city and the waterfront and our kind of maritime, not just history, but our maritime environment is really important to the whole city. So it's great to have you guys at Southern Water joining Shaping Portsmouth as a patron and being involved. We recently had Joe Woods, our Portsmouth Business Leaders Forum, talking to business leaders about the exact problems that you've kind of outlined and kind of highlighting that problem with storm overflows and how it works. And it's certainly something we want to keep the conversation going about. We all recognise that we all have a part to play, and actually it doesn't just benefit water quality, it benefits so many other environmental factors as well if we get this right, because of that link to carbon footprint and regreening places and making our city much better. So hopefully it's going to be £170 million well invested that will kind of improve our local infrastructure quite significantly, and it's great that you're really confident about that. So thanks for being so candid really about the the issues and the difficulties around it. I don't envy your job. So let's come back to the city. So we've spoken about the areas where there are issues and the impact that the kind of regreening can have. But we always like to end our podcasts on a little positive note about the city, and ask our guests about somewhere that they would recommend to go or something they like to do in Portsmouth. So what would be your recommendation?
I've got a young family and we love bikes. So my recommendation would be the pump track at Hilsea. Right. The amount of times my kids have been around there, they absolutely love it. And it's an example of the drainage either side of the track is really good. So that's what fixated me on it. But just somewhere to go as a family, close to the sea, and have a lot of enjoyment. It's just a special place for me.
So people who don't know exactly where that is, where exactly are you talking about?
Just at the very north, by the motorway, next to the moat. And it's just a little concrete track that has been put in where you can just race around on your bike and learn bike skills. And if you're up for it, do some jumps. It's just a really fun thing for a family to do for an afternoon. Yeah.
So I suppose the one thing we haven't mentioned that's kind of linked to that is all around the Portsmouth. We've had the Sea Defences project going on, which has also added in pathways and cycleways all around the sort of coastline. Does that have an impact on what you're trying to do in terms of the drainage issue?
It does, because we're always looking for opportunities for partnership. So let's just, a hypothetical scenario is that a highway authority goes around installing traffic calming on an estate. Why wouldn't we follow them round and install rain gardens in the road or swales at the time of doing that? Yeah. It's a source of most people's frustration that the electric company will come in and do it one day, then the water company will come in. And if we synchronise all of our capital programmes with other companies, we can achieve a lot more and retrofit a lot of these drainage improvements that I want whilst people are doing it. So it becomes standard, as in, if you're doing a big infrastructure project in Portsmouth, think about the drainage. And that is happening. So a lot of the redevelopment that you're seeing, we're getting our shoe in the door and saying, hang on a minute, what are you doing with your rainwater? Could you do something cool with it? Yeah. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah. So we've got the pump track up in Hilsea. We've got all of that fabulous work that's been doing around the coastline, which is great for young families, but kids who want to get out on bikes and explore around our coastline. So really, really good shout. One to look out for. One that's never cropped up before, actually,
hasn't it? It's a bit of a hidden gem.
No one's mentioned that before. So really, really good. But no. Thank you very much for coming in and explaining that. I'm sure you get quite a lot of difficult questions around water issues and the whole sewage scandal and how it's reported. So thank you for explaining it, and we kind of look forward to sort of joining you on the journey and trying to support that work, which will inevitably make our city better.
Thank you for your time. Thanks for listening.
Thanks. This podcast was brought to you by Shaping Portsmouth, working to make Portsmouth the #1 UK city in which to invest, live, learn, work and visit. To find out more, please visit shapingportsmouth.co.uk. This podcast was supported by Spark Community Space.